Well, good afternoon, comrades and friends. First of all, I'd like to apologize profusely for my inability to be at the forum today. It is largely the result of bookings. We couldn't find bookings on the flights to Tamale, and that's the reason why I was not able to be there. I'm happy to be associated with the United Voices for Change because it's raising important and relevant questions which would impact on our national development processes. And I'm happy that all of you have gathered today to consider, to discuss this important subject. First and foremost, I think we need to admit the fact that our national economy is in the doldrums. Indeed, Ghana today can be said to be completely bankrupt. And that is because we are spending 128% of total national revenue on debt servicing, debt repayment, and public sector emoluments. In real terms, this means that our government cannot even buy a cup of ice water after it has repaid loans, it has serviced loans, and paid public sector workers. Indeed, after these three payments, this country will be indebted already. Now, this is the state of bankruptcy. And I think all of us need to reflect on how to get our country out of bankruptcy, how to get our country to be able to provide the needs of our people. And the needs of our people are not extraordinary. They are the needs of people everywhere in the world. Our people need potable drinking water. Our people need to eat like every human being, every human being anywhere. They need access to housing, which will protect them from the vagaries of the weather and so on. They need to educate themselves, that is to pass on skills from generation to generation, to pass on knowledge from generation to generation. Our people need to put clothes on their backs. That's all they ask. That's all they demand. And this is certainly not too much. Now, why have we not been able to provide these basic things that our people need? We've not been able to do that because for well over 600 years, we've been subjected to vicious exploitation of everything that is us. Our forebears were carried into slavery in the transatlantic slave trade. We were colonized, we suffered classical colonialism, and today we suffer neocolonialism. Today we have enormous resources embedded in our soils. We have gold, we have lithium, we have everything, diamonds, our country is crisscrossed with rivers and so on. We are bordered in the south by the Atlantic Ocean and so on. The problem, however, is that all of these resources that we have are not owned by us, they are not exploited for the benefit of our people, but they're exploited largely, owned and exploited largely to fatten the bank accounts of multinational corporations in the colonial metropolis. That is our problem. And until we accept and implement the 1945 resolution of the Manchester Conference in the UK, which called on our people to intensify the struggle for national liberation, which called on our people to own their own resources and exploit these resources for their benefit, and to build the continental union of Africa, we would not get anywhere in the struggle. Now, what is the role of state enterprises in all of this effort? All of this effort to fight against poverty, to fight against misery, to build a prosperous African society. What is the role of state enterprises? I think it's important to realize that what I spoke about earlier, the accumulation of resources, the exploitation of these resources, the beneficiaries of these resources and so on, we are essentially talking about values. We are talking essentially about the accumulation and appropriation of surplus value. That's basically what we are talking about. So one of the cardinal questions we need to ask is who appropriates the values that we create in production, especially the surplus value. Who appropriates that? I think in a situation of hunger, poverty, and misery, it's important for the state to accumulate the values, the excess values that we produce, in order that it can invest these values in productive ventures which would improve our people's access to water, to health, and so on, as I've stated earlier on. And the only way to do that is for the state to intervene directly in the production and distribution of goods and services. Now, it's important also to note that state intervention by itself is not the panacea to the problems, because you can have state capitalist institutions where, even though the state has intervened in the process of production and distribution of what is produced and so on, the surpluses accumulated are not used for the satisfaction of the social needs of our people, but are used to make the elite in our society more comfortable, more foolish, and so on. You understand? So we need state intervention, which will make sure that the surpluses which are accumulated in the process of distribution and production and distribution is invested in the welfare of the people. Now, many times I've heard many people, sometimes unfortunately including academics, argue that state enterprises are useless because they are not making profits. Now, when you interrogate them further, they are talking about the accumulation of monetary profits. It's strange if you live in a country where your academics don't know that there are different types of profits which can be accumulated in the course of production and distribution. Yes, you can have a lot of money in your bank account, as profit. But you can also have a lot and lots and lots of decent houses for your people. That's also profit. You can improve the public transport system. That is also profit. You can feed your people better and more nutritious food and so on. That is also profit. So we need to make a distinction between social profit and monetary profit. And my preference is for society to generate a lot more social profit. Social profit being invested into the welfare of our people. Now, if you're just counting money, I don't think that you are being fair. State enterprises were not created to pile up money for money's sake. State enterprises were created under the Nkrumah regime, first and foremost, to bring about import substitution. And import substitution was aimed at delinking our national economies to the colonial economies. Import substitution was to create the conditions under which we did not have our mouth in the kitchen of our oppressors, as ABA Fuseni has been saying for so many years now. So the purpose of the state enterprises was not just to accumulate monetary profit, but to make sure that our standard of living improved, was to make sure that the national economy was delinked from the metropolitan economy and so on. So in the assessment of state enterprises, these are the key things that we need to look at. Now, those who think that state enterprises have no relevance, that we should close them down and so on, I think you need to watch them very closely. And watch them very closely because the way they behave tells the whole story. In opposition, these people make a lot of noise about how private capital, private enterprise is the engine of growth, is the engine of development and so on. As soon as their political parties win power, they start to scramble for the state enterprises. They all want to be managing directors and deputy managing directors of state enterprises. They leave, they run away from the private enterprises and come into the state sector. Now, what does that tell you? If they are convinced that the private sector is the engine of development, is the engine of growth, let them stay in the private sector, let the private sector work for them. Why are they escaping to the public sector and so on? So that's a question that I think is important that we ask, from time to time. Why are they running away from the private sector to the public sector all the time? The other important thing that we need to find out is that since 1966, more than 400 enterprises, state enterprises and so on, which were built under the Nkrumah government were privatized. Now, how many of them have survived in private hands? There's so much talk about state enterprises failing. Nobody is talking about private enterprises failing. Now, all these more than 400 enterprises which ended up in private hands, what faith did they have? And my dear comrades, I can tell you quite honestly that of all the 400 and so state enterprises which were handed over to private capital, only 2 have survived so far. State Fishing Corporation collapsed, Black Star Line collapsed, everything collapsed, except Golden Tulip Hotel and Moving Peak Ambassador. What does this tell you? The hands of private capital are not magic. They also fail. You understand? So in addressing these issues, I think, look, our main objective ought to be, what can we do? What enterprises can we build and run? What society can we run in which the disadvantaged will be taken care of? In which the overprivileged will be made to share some of his privileges so that we can all thrive together. I thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pity I cannot be there with you, but please, my comrades and friends, we will meet again very soon somewhere to carry on these very, very important discussions about how to create a new world in which what Israel is doing in Gaza would not happen again. A new world in which everybody will have access to food and water. A new world in which all of us will have access to decent housing. A new world in which our access to education will not be blocked by poverty and other mishaps. I salute you all. Thank you very much.